I'm Chris Ciccatelli from the Caffrey News Network, and welcome to this week's episode of Mental Mechanics. This evening, we're going to discuss the research paper done by Whitney DeCamp of Western Michigan University and Chris Ferguson of Stetson University when they compared the impact of degree of exposure to violent video games, family background, and other factors of youth violence in 2015. When William Higginbotham invented the first video game in 1958, it was a simple tennis game. Arcades became very popular in the late 70s, early 80s, and with that, so did video games. The first video game that featured fighting, which was Sega's Heavyweight Champ, came out in 1984. Now, as the variety of video games evolved, so did the concern that the violence and sexual content of them was affecting those who played them. In response to these concerns, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB, was established in 1994, and it wasn't just the parents voicing their concerns. In an interview with CNN in 1997, then-Senator Joe Lieberman referred to digital video games as digital poison. Among ratings that the ESRB developed was the mature rating, which is the key point in this research paper. This means the content is generally suitable for ages 17 and up, and may contain intense violence, blood and gore, sexual content, and/or strong language. Data which was analyzed by DeCamp and Ferguson was collected by the University of Delaware Center for Drug and Health Studies, utilizing a part of the Delaware Schools Survey. This survey is completed annually by 5th, 8th, and 11th grade students, although for this study, only 8th and 11th grade students were polled with these specific questions. Participant results were an adequate representation of the demographics of students attending the school system at the time. They were also about 50-50 for males and females. One of the questions in the survey was how often on average do you play violent video games, such as games rated M? There were 7 possible answers, which were never, very rarely, 1 hour per week, 2 to 3 hours per week, 4 to 5 hours per week, 6 to 10 hours per week, and more than 10 hours per week. They were also asked about the level of parental involvement in their day-to-day lives, such as how often do they do things together, have meaningful conversations, how comfortable the child is in sharing information with a parent. This was done in an effort to establish how much of an influence the parents may have on the child versus how much of an effect the video games might have on the child's upbringing. Students were also asked in the survey about the specific type of violence in the video games they played, whether it was one person hitting one other person, or it was done in a group setting, such as joining in a fight because their friends were involved. In addition, the students were also asked about potential violence in the home. Was there yelling, name-calling, threats? If they hear violence, if they both hear and see it, was it involving the child, or was it just between the adults? Students were asked about the level of violence they had personally been involved in, such as have you ever hit someone with the intention of hurting them? In total, over 9,000 results were analyzed, with that data showing an overwhelming majority of the 8th grade students, both male and female, had played video games with one-on-one fighting versus group fighting. For the males, the 4 to 5 hour per week answer and the more than 10 hour per week answer each had more than 30% participation. For the females, this age range, their top choice was 6 to 10 hours. Among 11th graders, again, the majority said they took part in one-on-one fighting versus group fighting. This time, the top video game playing in this bracket with 22% for men was 6 to 10 hours, and for women, almost 40% said they played 2 to 3 hours. These results were compared to the answers the students gave about actually physically participating in violence, which led DeCamp and Ferguson to the conclusion that the home environment, relationship with the parents, and the demographics were stronger predictors of violent behavior than just playing violent video games was. Now, DeCamp and Ferguson were definitely not the only ones who have researched this. In fact, there have been more than 100 different studies conducted on this topic alone. One of them was by Paul Adichie and Tina Willoughby, which was published in 2013 by Springer Nature, which is a German-British academic publishing company. Paul and Tina saw that a majority of the research on this subject focused on the correlation of violent content in video games and youth violence, but they weren't convinced that was the case. They did their own studies, which included just under 1,500 adolescents from grades 9 till 12, about 50% male, 50% female. Now, their results suggested that it was more of the competition, not the violence, that led to the aggression. The findings did find a link between the two, but suggested much more research needs to be done about it. Now, in an effort to look into local feelings, CCN sent out 2 of our field reporters to our local area and engaged with some people right here in our own backyard. Let's first go to Prince Jiru and see what he found out.
Hello guys, reporting in from Jimmy John. Who am I here with today?
Mike.
And do you play video games or like anything?
No.
And do you know anybody who does?
Yes. Travis. He's a gamer. He spends money. He gambles. Yes, he does all that. He's in the football league, and that's all I know.
Do you think like any of the video games like encourage some of that behavior, or like do you think it's like some other effects in the community?
Some of them games is made for adults. I would say if you're 11 and under, I like where you shooting up everybody, the car game. What's the name of it?
Like GTA or something? Like Grand Theft Auto?
Yeah, no kids should be playing that game until they get about 18 in my humble opinion.
So you think it's like maybe like the developers' responsibility or the parents?
I would have to say the parents.
Okay. Who am I here with today?
James Rogers.
And do you play any video games, or your kids play video games?
Yes.
And do you see any like violent behavior in your children?
No. I mean, they get mad and they, get frustrated, but they're not out shooting anybody up or anything.
And do you think it's like the responsibility of the game developers to make the games more kid friendly?
No. It's up to the parents to figure out what they want their kids to play and what they don't want to play.
So you think it's more of a parent's responsibility?
Yeah. Of course.
Who am I here with today?
Jessica?
And do you have any kids?
Yes, I have 2.
You let them play video games?
Unfortunately, yes.
And do you see any violent behavior going on with your kids, like caused by video games?
Absolutely. My 4-year-old, when he goes on video games, becomes a terror. He then tries to mimic what he sees on the game, hence jumping on top of your head like a chicken or a parrot. His current thing is he will run across the couch, wrap one leg around your neck, and hang on and say, "I'm a parrot," because he saw it on Roblox.
And do you think it's like the developers' like responsibility to make the games like a little more kid friendly or something?
No, it's absolutely on the parents to watch your kids and not let them watch parrot videos.
Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Prince. In addition to Prince, we also have Shaquille Backus, who is in a different part of town. Let's see what some other people had to say about it.
All right. Who am I here with today?
My name is Jalissa.
Okay. What would you describe as violent video game?
I guess something with a lot of murder, a lot of like deep tones, I guess. But yeah, something like deep tones, violence, 18 plus, basically.
And like, what's your personal experience with video games? Like, do you play them? And what games do you play?
I play some games, not like mainstream games, like people would think like GTA or like other stuff that people think that are violent. I just kind of play like Roblox.
Yeah. And like, have you ever noticed a change in your emotions, like in terms of aggression when you play these games?
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially when something like irritates you. But I feel like that happens with anything. I like with something like if something happens to you.
And what do you think causes people to be violent?
What causes people to be violent?
Mm-hmm.
Like during video games?
Yes.
I think losing a lot. Like, when you're like, I don't know, maybe it's that adrenaline, the rush of doing something correct and then just failing afterwards that gets people angry a lot. It tests their patience, definitely.
Gotcha. And do you know anyone within your community who plays violent video games, like other than yourself?
I would say, I guess my brother, but he doesn't really play violent video games. I mean, he plays Nintendo, so you know how Nintendo is, but I can't really think of people who really play violent video games who are like violent, but like, yeah.
Okay. Like, say you had a child, would you allow them to play violent video games or like regularly?
Honestly, whatever my child would play, I wouldn't mind. Like as long as it's within their age range, I guess. But like I feel like kids should experience like experience like many types of game genres, like like the child friendly ones or like deep ones or yeah.
Yeah. And do you believe violent video games desensitize people to real world violence?
I think to an extent maybe, but like yeah, maybe just to an extent if someone's like really like but yeah.
And do you think banning video game violence would like reduce violence in society?
Oh no, I don't think that, because I feel like people would get more like aggravated if those violent video games have been banned. Yeah.
Right.
And there's other forms of media that also display violence as well besides video games. So why aren't those banned, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
And should you think that parents should be responsible for monitoring their children's gaming habits?
Yeah. Parents should definitely monitor their children. Yeah, they shouldn't have like free internet access or like just monitor your kid, check in on them. Yeah.
And finally, do you think if anything should be done about like violent video games and their accessibility to youth?
I think somewhat like like age checks, I guess. Like if you're at a store or something, so like kids won't get their hands on it, but parents would still get their kids that. So I'm not really sure like what means or like what. There's always going to be a way, basically.
And actual last question:
All right.
do you think there's a more responsibility for like game developers when creating violent content, or is it up to like the discretion of the individual player?
I think it's up to the individual player, because I feel like the developers don't really have like, oh yeah, I'm gonna create a violent video game just for other people to be violent. Like I don't think they thought of that when they're making the game. Maybe there's some themes of like violence that are important to the story or something like that. But like, yeah, I feel like it's up to the individual person, not the developers.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Today.
Dacia.
And first question, what would you define as a violent video game?
I would say first-person shooter games.
Okay. And why do you think they make people violent?
I don't think they make people violent. I think some people are just inherently violent.
Okay. And like, what's your personal relationship with video games or experience? Like, what games do you play?
I don't play games too often, but I know recently, me and my friend were playing It Takes Two and Minecraft.
And like, when you do play games, do you think like it like incites violence to you? Like, does it make you violent?
No, usually it just makes me anxious.
Okay. And do you think there's a negative stigma towards violent video games?
Yeah, but mostly towards parents. I mean, mostly from parents.
And do you think video games, like violent video games, influence children and teenagers differently than adults?
Yes. I think, well, yeah. Children are very impressionable. They're more impressionable than adults are, and it's easy for kids to pick up on things. So if violence is always in their ears, especially if they're playing like multiplayer games with adults, then they're definitely going to pick up some really bad stuff. So yeah, I think it definitely would affect them differently.
Right. And if you were to have children, would you allow them to play violent video games?
Yep.
Like not at all, like not at a certain age.
I guess yeah, at like a certain age, but I mean at that point there's just like so many games in the world, so many different types of games.
And like, what would be that cutoff age?
Maybe like 16, 17.
Okay. And would you allow exposure to other forms of violent media, like movies and such? And like, what age also?
Most likely not. I definitely wouldn't allow them to. I mean, obviously, I can't always be around them 24/7 to like stop them from being introduced, So if they wanted to, they would obviously be able to find a way to, but I wouldn't personally.
And what do you think, if anything, should be done about violent video games and their accessibility to our youth?
Well, I think there's already enough being done with the rating system, like mature or rated E for everyone. I feel like the reason why kids have access to violent video games or video games that the parents are worried about their children having is because the parents themselves aren't doing research and are buying them for kids.
So you think it's like the parents' job too?
Yeah, it's definitely the parents' job.
And do you think there's a more responsibility for like game developers when creating violent content, or do you think like it's up to the individual player?
Yeah, no, so like I said, with the rating system, that's really all they have to do. Their job is to inform people who will be playing the games. So if the parents choose not to do any research, that's their problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, do you think video games contribute to youth violence?
Do I think video games contribute to youth violence? I think they can. I would say, I mean, seems like times have changed since I was your guys' age, 25 years ago. But when I was playing video games in the 90s, I mostly played sports video games like Tecmo Bowl, which is football, and of course Super Mario on the original Nintendo. But like I would say that they can contribute to youth violence if, I mean, these video games are becoming so vivid and real looking, and they're shooting people up and stuff.
Okay, thank you. And if like feasible, like have you noticed any changes in people around you that play video games in terms of like violent behavior?
Not personally.
Okay. And would you or do you or would you allow your child to play video games?
Say it again.
Would you allow your child to play video games?
Yes, I would, but I might. I'd want to make sure. I'd want to know what they're playing, and not just let them play anything without me knowing.
Gotcha. And the study we are referencing suggests that family background has more of an impact on youth violence more than video games. Would you agree with that? So like how you grew up and stuff?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And what do you think, if anything, should be done about violent video games and their accessibility to the youth?
I personally think that that's a parental type thing, and not necessarily, doesn't need to be necessarily restricted by anybody other than mom and dad.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, as you heard, there's definitely no shortage of variety of opinions on this topic. With all the research that's done to date, even with all the different studies that have been done, there is still no consensus on how much of an effect violence in video games has on the youth that play them. However, there's no doubt that research is far from over. Thanks for joining us this evening. For the Caffrey Class Network, Chris Chickatell.